Welcome to the long, tense beginning of this HOA story. It all began on a cold morning when he stepped into the courthouse alone. The air outside still heavy with fog, the kind that made everything feel slower, darker, heavier. He walked with steady steps, his boots echoing across the empty hallway like quiet warnings no one understood yet. In his hand he carried a worn-out brown folder, the same folder people had seen him hold for months. The one the HOA board made fun of again and again. They always joked that the folder was empty, that it was a loser's folder, a beggar's file, a last hope for a man with nothing left. But today, that simple-looking folder held something that could break every smile in that courtroom. As he pushed the heavy door open, the warm courtroom lights fell on his tired face. He looked like a man who had spent too many nights without sleep, but he also looked strangely calm, like someone who already knew how the day would end. On the right side, the HOA board sat together in a straight line, wearing matching suits and fake confidence. Their gold watches glowed under the lights, and their polished shoes clicked when they crossed their legs. They turned toward him the moment he walked in. And then came the laughter, soft at first, almost like whispers, but then louder, clearer, sharper. One woman leaned toward the man beside her and said, "Look, he still came. Poor thing." Another one chuckled. "He thinks he can fight us? Please." A man in the front smirked. "He won't last 5 minutes." The HOA president herself, known for her arrogant attitude, raised her eyebrows and said loudly, "Enjoy your last day as a homeowner." Their voices filled the courtroom with confidence and mockery, and it felt like they were already celebrating their victory. But the quiet man didn't react. He didn't drop his head. He didn't look angry. He didn't even blink. He just kept walking toward his seat, the brown folder held gently against his chest. And that was what scared them, even if they didn't realize it yet. Behind those tired eyes, behind that calm expression, behind that steady walk was a truth they never imagined. For months, everyone had believed he was losing. Neighbors, board members, even the judge, who watched case after case where the HOA always won. But what nobody in that courtroom knew, neither the HOA, nor the judge, nor even the sheriff standing near the wall, was that this man had spent months digging through dusty county archives, searching through boxes no one had touched in years, opening water-damaged files, scanning ancient maps, and tracing forgotten signatures. He had walked into old storage rooms filled with spider webs, scanned microfilm in dimly lit county offices, and studied faded property maps with shaking hands. Every document told a story. Every signature uncovered a secret. Every map pointed to something bigger. And last night, at exactly 2 a.m., when most of the town was asleep, he found something that changed everything. Something the HOA never expected anyone to find. Something they had desperately hoped would stay hidden forever. A missing piece. A forgotten record. A truth so powerful it could turn the entire case upside down. When he found it, he didn't cheer. He didn't yell. He didn't even smile. He just sat there in the cold glow of his kitchen light, staring at the document with a mix of shock and quiet relief. It felt like the weight of the whole world had just shifted. And now, as he stood in the courtroom, that very paper rested inside the old brown folder, close to his heart. He looked across the room. The HOA board continued laughing as if the entire world belonged to them. They believed the courtroom belonged to them. They believed the judge belonged to them. After all, they had always won. Every case, every argument, every fight. They believed they were untouchable. But today, everything was different. Today, the quiet man had walked into the courthouse not as a helpless homeowner, not as a tired victim, not as a man fighting to save his house. Today, he walked in with a purpose. Today, he walked in with a secret. Today, he walked in with the truth that could destroy them all. He sat down at the small wooden table, placing the brown folder carefully in front of him. His hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of what he was about to expose. Across the room, the HOA president leaned back in her chair with a smug smile. She adjusted her pink blazer, crossed her arms, and whispered loudly enough for him to hear, "He's done. He has nothing." Another board member cracked his knuckles and said, "This will be easy." A third laughed. I give him 10 minutes before he breaks. But the quiet man simply lifted his eyes and looked at them, one by one. His expression remained calm. No anger, no fear, no panic. Just steady confidence that made the room feel colder. The judge entered the courtroom, and everyone rose. The HOA stood proudly, almost arrogantly. The man stood too, but his posture was relaxed, almost peaceful. The judge seated himself and looked over the documents. "We are here today," the judge said, "to address the HOA's complaint regarding violations, unpaid fines, and the request to place a lien on the defendant's home." The HOA nodded eagerly. The quiet man didn't react. "This is your last chance to defend your property," the judge said, glancing at the man. "Do you have anything to say before we proceed?" The courtroom went silent. Even the laughter froze in the air. Everyone waited. The HOA expected him to beg, to stutter, to apologize, to admit defeat like so many before him. But instead, the man placed his hand on the brown folder and slowly pulled it closer. When he opened it, the room leaned forward. Even the judge adjusted his glasses. The HOA president whispered, "What is he doing?" He took out one paper, just one. An old, faded document with yellow edges and darkened corners. The kind of document that looked like it belonged in a museum, not a courtroom. The judge blinked. The HOA frowned. The man's voice was steady, deep, and calm as he spoke. "Your Honor," he said, "before we talk about their fines, we need to talk about their land." The whole courtroom froze. A strange stillness filled the room. The HOA president scoffed. "What land? This is about his house." The man shook his head slowly. "No," he replied softly. "It is about all of yours." The judge leaned forward. The sheriff looked up. The HOA board exchanged nervous glances. The man continued speaking, his voice calm but filled with quiet conviction. "Last night," he said, "I found something in the county archives. Something the HOA didn't want anyone to find. Something that changes everything." The HOA president laughed nervously. "He's bluffing." The man held the paper up just enough for the judge to see, but not anyone else. The judge's eyes widened almost instantly. He reached out and said, "Bring that here." The man walked forward and handed it to the judge. The HOA members craned their necks, desperate to see. The judge studied the document, flipping it slowly, carefully. His eyebrows tightened. His jaw shifted. He read it again, and again, 3 times. Then he looked up, shock spreading across his face. The HOA president stood halfway out of her chair. "Your Honor," she asked nervously, "what is that?" The judge didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the quiet man with a new expression, respect mixed with disbelief. Then he said the words that made every heartbeat in the room stop. "This changes everything." A wave of fear swept through the HOA. Their confidence vanished. Their smiles died. Their laughter collapsed into silence. The quiet man returned to his seat, but this time he walked with the confidence of someone who was not defending himself, but someone who was about to reveal a truth deep enough to bury every enemy in the room. The HOA board whispered in panic. "What did he find? Is that real?" "No, impossible. Someone stop him." But it was too late. The first blow had already been struck. The truth had stepped into the courtroom. And now the quiet man was no longer the victim. He was the storm. And the HOA had no idea how much destruction that storm was about to bring. This was no longer a battle to save his home. This was the beginning of a fight to expose who truly owned the neighborhood. And the HOA's days of laughing were over. Because today, the courtroom felt heavier now, the air thick with tension, as if every person inside could sense that something powerful had shifted the moment the man handed over that old document. The HOA board, who entered the room with loud confidence, now sat stiff and uneasy, their eyes bouncing nervously between the judge, the man, and each other. They whispered in shaky voices, trying to guess what the paper said, trying to convince themselves it was nothing, trying to hold onto the last pieces of control they believed they had. But deep inside, they were frightened, because they all felt the same quiet truth creeping in. The man they mocked was no longer losing. He was no longer the weak one. He was no longer the easy target they could push around. Their power was slipping away, and they knew it. The judge adjusted his glasses again as he continued reading the document, shaking his head in disbelief, his fingers tapping the table in a slow, thoughtful rhythm. The courtroom was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fans and the sound of pages turning. The once confident HOA president finally stood up, her voice trembling as she said, "Your Honor, we don't understand what this is. We request to see the document." The judge didn't look at her. He simply raised his hand and said, "Sit down." That one command told everyone in the room that things had changed. The HOA president slowly sat back down, her face pale, her hands gripping the edges of the table. The man didn't move. He sat calmly, watching them crumble, but there was no joy in his eyes, no arrogance, just a deep sadness mixed with determination, like someone who had been pushed too far for too long and now finally stood in a place where the truth had room to breathe. The judge finally spoke. "Where did you find this?" The man answered softly, "In the county's old archive room. It was buried under other documents, misfiled for years, maybe forgotten, maybe ignored." The judge nodded slowly, his expression serious. "And you verified its authenticity?" The man opened the brown folder again, pulling out another sheet, this one cleaner, newer, with a county seal and signatures. "Yes, Your Honor. The county clerk signed off on it last night." The HOA board gasped softly, and panic spread across their faces like wildfire. One board member leaned forward, whispering loudly, "This is staged." He faked it, but even he didn't sound confident. He sounded desperate. The man lifted his eyes and spoke in a steady voice. "Why would I fake something I could easily prove?" The HOA president slammed her palm on the table, unable to stay quiet anymore. "What is this document? What are you saying?" The judge stared at her, eyes sharp, and said, "He will explain, and after that you may respond. Until then, remain silent." She froze. The quiet man inhaled deeply, then stood from his seat. Not fast, not dramatic, just slowly, like someone carrying a truth too heavy to rush. He walked to the center of the courtroom, and suddenly all attention was on him. Even the sheriff stepped forward, watching him with interest. "Your Honor," he said softly, "this document is the original land record for the entire subdivision the HOA was built on." Murmurs rippled across the courtroom. The HOA president blinked rapidly, confused and terrified. The man continued, "The developer who built this neighborhood decades ago never completed the final transfer." "Meaning?" He turned slightly, looking directly at the HOA table. "The HOA board has been running this community on land they do not legally own." The board members froze. One dropped his pen. Another covered his mouth. The HOA president whispered, No, that's not possible." But the man wasn't done. "And that means every fine, every threat, every lien, every punishment you've given out for years has no legal standing. Not one of them." Silence. Heavy, thick, terrifying. The HOA board looked like they had been struck by a train. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide, their hands shaking. It was the first time in years they looked powerless. Truly powerless. The judge leaned back in his chair, stunned. "Are you saying," he said slowly, "that according to county law, you are the legal owner of the land the HOA operates on?" The man nodded once. Calm, steady, unshaken. The judge exhaled sharply and leaned forward, pressing his fingers to his forehead. This is unbelievable." The HOA president suddenly stood again, this time with panic, not arrogance. "Your Honor, there must be some mistake. A missing file cannot mean he owns everything." She sounded like someone watching her entire world fall apart in real time. But the man lifted his voice again, this time with emotion, pain mixed with strength. "You spent years trying to take my home," he said quietly, "but you never knew that your entire neighborhood was still tied to the old developer. When I searched for my grandfather's land records, I found this file by accident. and it showed something none of us expected. The judge nodded. And that is. The man swallowed, his voice thick, his heart heavy. My grandfather was the developer's partner. And when the developer passed away suddenly, the last transfer was never filed. His name remained the legal owner. And after he died, the land passed down to me. A soft gasp filled the courtroom. Homeowners sitting in the benches covered their mouths. One whispered, "Oh my God!" Another whispered, "This can't be real." But the judge confirmed it. His grandfather's signature is here, and the county's records support everything he said. This document is real. The HOA president sat down, her legs shaking. No, we would have known. The realtor, the builder, someone would have told us. The man looked at her with calm, sad eyes. You didn't know because no one knew. The records were misplaced for years. You didn't check because you never imagined the land wasn't yours. Then he added quietly, "You were too busy trying to destroy me." The HOA president's eyes filled with tears, not of guilt, but of fear. She whispered, "This is impossible, absolutely impossible." But it wasn't. It was the truth. And the truth didn't care about their arrogance or their pride. The judge slowly set the document down, rubbing his forehead. This means every action taken by the HOA may be invalid. Every fine, every threat, every lien, every rule. The HOA board members looked like their lives had just shattered. The courtroom was so silent. Even the ticking clock on the back wall felt loud. The man finally returned to his seat, placing the brown folder gently on the table. He didn't look triumphant. He didn't look proud. He looked like someone who had been broken for a long time and was finally standing again, not out of revenge but out of necessity. The HOA president suddenly whispered to one of her board members, "If this is true, we're finished. All of us." Another board member whispered back, He can evict us. He can take our homes." Those words sent waves of fear through the entire table. And the quiet man heard them. He didn't turn. He didn't speak. But a small, sad smile appeared on his lips. Not because he wanted their homes. Not because he wanted revenge. But because, for the first time in years, they understood the fear they had caused him. The judge cleared his throat, his voice slow and serious. "The court will need time to process this. But one thing is clear. Everything the HOA has done against this man must be paused immediately. Until further notice, the HOA has no authority." Shock rippled through the room. It was over. The HOA had fallen. Their power was gone. And the quiet man who walked into the courtroom alone was no longer the one being judged. He was the one holding the truth, the one holding the land, the one holding the future of the entire neighborhood. And for the first time in their lives, the HOA board was truly scared. Because now they knew, the man they laughed at was the man who could take everything from them. The courtroom felt like it was sinking under its own silence as the shock spread across every face in the room. The HOA board, once loud, proud, and confident, now sat frozen like statues cracking under pressure. Their arrogance had drained out of them completely, replaced with fear, confusion, and something even deeper, regret. Not regret for what they had done to him, but regret for being caught. The quiet man watched them in silence, his heart heavy, because even though he had found the truth that protected him, he knew this wasn't going to be simple. Years of abuse, threats, fines, harassment. Everything the HOA had done couldn't be undone in a moment. Those scars still lived in him. And yet, even now, as they panicked, he didn't feel happy. He didn't feel powerful. He felt the weight of every night he stayed awake. Every morning he dreaded opening his mailbox. Every day he lived in fear of losing the only home he had left from his family. He remembered the day the HOA president stood on his porch with a clipboard, telling him he was unfit to live in this neighborhood. He remembered the letters saying he was in violation for things he didn't even understand. He remembered their threats to sell his home, throw his belongings out, and force him to live in his truck. He remembered how he felt small, how he felt worthless, how he felt like no one would ever listen to him. But now the truth was out, And for the first time, the people who controlled everything were no longer in control at all. One of the board members, a tall man with silver hair and a voice that always sounded angry, leaned forward and whispered harshly, "This can't hold up. We have to fight this. We can't lose everything because of one paper." The HOA president shook her head, her hands trembling. "It's not one paper," she whispered back. "The judge believes him, and if the judge believes him, the county will too." Another board member, a woman who had once laughed at him while handing him a fine for having a non-approved tree, now stared at the table, her eyes wet. "We've ruined ourselves," she whispered shakily. The quiet man heard their whispers. He heard their fear. But he didn't feel satisfaction. He didn't feel victory. He felt tired. So tired. Like a man who had walked through fire for too long and finally reached a place where he could breathe. But the smoke still lived inside him. The judge broke the silence with a deep breath, leaning back in his chair and studying the document again as if hoping it would change or disappear. Didn't. Stayed real, solid, undeniable. "This case," the judge said slowly, "is no longer about one home. It is now about the legality of the entire HOA's existence." The HOA president covered her mouth with shaking fingers. "Your Honor, please." But the judge lifted his hand sharply. "You will remain silent until spoken to." Her hand dropped immediately. The man felt a strange mix of shock and sorrow watching her. This same woman who had stood on his driveway with police behind her, accusing him loudly of violating 10 HOA rules. This same woman who called him a stubborn old mule in front of neighbors. This same woman who smirked when she placed a lien notice on his front door. Now she sat trembling, powerless, terrified. Felt unreal. The judge continued, "Until the county reviews these land records fully, the HOA cannot issue fines, cannot threaten foreclosure, cannot take any action against this man or any homeowner." Whispered gasps filled the room. A few homeowners sitting in the back actually smiled. A small spark of hope after years of fear. But the HOA board looked like the floor had fallen out from beneath them. The quiet man lifted his eyes slowly, focusing on the woman who had mocked him earlier that morning with, "Enjoy your last day as a homeowner." Now she couldn't even meet his gaze. Her face was pale, her lips trembling, her hands squeezing each other like she was fighting to stay calm. And that was when the emotional weight hit him. He realized something painful, something deep. He didn't want to destroy her or the others. He just wanted peace. He just wanted fairness. He just wanted to stop being bullied in his own home. But now, the truth he uncovered had the power to shake their entire world. And he didn't know what would happen next. The judge turned to him again. "Sir," he said gently, "this discovery, this could give you full authority over the land. Are you prepared for what that means? For the responsibility it carries?" The quiet man looked down at the brown folder, the same folder he carried through rain, heat, snow, and humiliation. He ran his fingers across the worn surface. "Prepared? No, not really. But this wasn't about being prepared. This was about surviving. This was about standing up after being pushed down too many times." "I'm prepared," he said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I didn't ask for this, but I won't run from it either." The judge nodded with respect. The HOA board whispered again, this time even more frantic. "What if he takes the land? What if he shuts us down? What if he takes our homes?" "He can't do that, can he?" Panic spread like wildfire, but the judge said nothing to comfort them. He didn't deny the possibilities. He didn't soothe them with promises. And that silence terrified them more than anything. The HOA president finally stood again, this time with tears in her eyes. Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Your Honor, we need time. We need lawyers, we need—" "Sit down," the judge said sharply, not unkind but firm. She froze for a moment, then slowly lowered herself back into the chair, breaking completely. The first time in years she wasn't the most powerful person in the room. And everyone saw it. The quiet man watched her crumble, and a strange heaviness filled his chest. He remembered all the nights he sat alone at his kitchen table, reading threatening letters she signed. He remembered her cold voice on the phone telling him, "If you can't follow the rules, maybe you don't deserve to live here." He remembered her laughing as she walked away from his porch. He remembered how powerless she made him feel. But now she was the one powerless. Her eyes met his, finally, after months of looking down on him. And in that moment she understood something that terrified her more than losing her job, her control, or her position. She understood that he held all the power now. She understood that he had every right to use it against her. She understood that he could ruin her life the same way she tried to ruin his. But instead of anger in his eyes, she saw something she didn't expect: sadness. Deep sadness. And that made her cry harder, because she realized the man she tried to destroy wasn't like her at all. He had heart. He had patience. He had strength. And he had something she never had: truth on his side. The judge announced a short recess, and everyone slowly rose from their chairs. But no one spoke to him. No one laughed. No one looked at him the way they did before. Some looked afraid. Some looked guilty. Some looked ashamed. He stayed seated, quiet, staring at the brown folder that had changed everything. The sheriff walked past him, paused, and placed a hand gently on his shoulder. "You did good," he said softly. "Not many people would have fought this far." The man nodded quietly, unable to speak. The sheriff whispered again, "Whatever happens next, just know you earned every bit of this justice." And then he walked away, leaving the man alone with his thoughts, his memories, and the heavy truth he uncovered. A truth that now had the power to break or save everyone in the neighborhood. When the recess ended and everyone returned to the courtroom, the atmosphere felt completely different from before. When the man had first walked in that morning, the room had been filled with whispers, laughter, and the HOA's smug confidence. But now the air was tight, heavy, almost trembling with fear. Even the homeowners sitting in the benches kept their eyes low, unsure what would happen next, unsure whether everything they knew about their neighborhood was about to collapse. The quiet man walked back to his seat slowly, not with victory in his steps but with a weight on his shoulders heavier than anyone in the room understood. He wasn't just holding a folder anymore. He was holding an entire community's future. The HOA board returned to their seats like prisoners walking back to a cell, their faces pale, their lips tight, their hands cold. The HOA president couldn't stop staring at him. Her eyes red from crying, her confidence shattered, her voice gone. She looked like a person who had aged 10 years in 30 minutes. The judge took his seat again, tapping his pen slowly on the wooden bench, thinking deeply before speaking. "Before we continue," he said, "I want everyone in this courtroom to understand the seriousness of the situation." His voice echoed in the silent room. "If the documents presented today are fully accurate, and so far they appear to be, then the HOA has been operating without legal land rights for years." Murmurs spread across the benches. A few homeowners looked terrified. One man whispered, "Does that mean we could lose our houses?" A woman beside him whispered back, "I don't know. I don't know anything anymore." The HOA president raised her shaking hand, trying hard to control her voice. "Your Honor, please. These people have families. They saved their whole lives to buy these homes. We cannot lose everything over one missing file." The judge looked at her calmly but sternly. "You will have your chance to speak. Sit down." She obeyed instantly. The quiet man watched her, and a strange feeling tugged at his chest. He remembered how many times she refused to listen to him, how many times she made him sit in mandatory HOA meetings, humiliating him in front of neighbors. And now she was the one pleading for mercy from him, because she knew he had the power to end everything she controlled. The judge turned to the man. "Sir, you have the floor." The man slowly rose from his seat, not rushing, not showing strength, but showing clarity. He looked around the courtroom, seeing faces filled with fear, confusion, and pain. And it hurt him. "Your Honor," he said softly, "I never wanted to hurt anyone here." The room stilled. Even the HOA board looked up with confused expressions. "I didn't come here today expecting this," he continued. "I came to defend my home, my only home, the home my grandfather built with his hands. The home my parents raised me in. The home I was ready to lose because these people, he gestured gently toward the HOA table, made me feel like I was not welcome in my own place. The HOA president lowered her eyes, ashamed. When they fined me, I stayed quiet. When they threatened me, I stayed quiet. When they mocked me, I stayed quiet. When they tried to take my home, his voice shook for the first time. I almost gave up. A few homeowners swallowed hard, feeling the pain in his voice. But last night, when I found the truth about the land, I realized something. He looked at the judge. This isn't just about me anymore. Then he turned toward the homeowners sitting behind him. This is about all of you. Every family in this neighborhood. Every person who just wanted a home. Every parent who worked hard to pay their mortgage. Every child who grew up on those streets. You don't deserve to lose what you built. A soft, emotional gasp echoed from the benches. One older woman wiped her eyes. A young couple held hands tightly. Even the sheriff felt his throat tighten. The HOA board looked stunned. They expected him to use his power to crush them. They expected revenge. They expected punishment. But instead, he spoke like someone carrying the weight of an entire community. Someone who understood what loss felt like too well to inflict it on others. Then he said something no one expected. Your Honor, I am not asking for anyone to lose their homes. Every head in the room snapped toward him. Even the judge blinked. Even the HOA president looked up sharply, tears falling again. But this time for a different reason. He continued, I don't want their houses. I don't want their land. I only want the truth recognized. I only want fairness. The courtroom felt warmer suddenly, almost hopeful. But then his expression hardened. Not with anger, but with a deep resolve. However, the HOA board stiffened. There must be accountability. A cold shiver traveled across the room. The HOA president gripped the table. The judge nodded slowly. Explain. The man inhaled deeply, his voice steady and full of emotion. These board members used their power to control and intimidate people. They used the HOA to bully, to threaten, to scare. They broke families. They made people cry. They made me believe I would be thrown out of the home my grandfather built. His voice cracked. That is something I cannot forgive. The HOA president closed her eyes, tears streaming. She knew this was the moment everything would change for her. So, Your Honor, he said, I request only one thing. The courtroom leaned forward. I want the entire HOA board removed. Permanently. The HOA president let out a quiet, broken gasp. One board member whispered, No, no. This can't be happening. Another man grabbed his head with both hands, whispering, We're finished? The judge nodded slowly, absorbing the request. And who do you believe should run the community, if not the HOA board? The man responded calmly. The homeowners themselves. The people who actually live there. The people who deserve a voice. A wave of relief spread through the benches. A few people clapped softly before stopping themselves. The HOA president suddenly stood up, unable to hold back anymore. Her voice cracked with emotions she could no longer hide. Please, Your Honor, we've made mistakes. Yes, but taking away our positions, everything we worked for. She looked at the man, her face broken. Please, don't do this. Her voice shook. We were wrong, but we don't deserve to lose everything. The man looked at her for a long moment, his pain and compassion battling inside him. And then he said in a soft but firm voice, You didn't care when you were doing it to me. She broke into tears, collapsing into her chair. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't revenge. It was truth. Pure, heavy truth. And everyone in the courtroom felt it. The judge sighed deeply, the weight of the decision falling onto his shoulders. Given the evidence and the harm caused, he said slowly, I believe the request is reasonable. The HOA board shook in disbelief. The judge raised his gavel. The room froze, effective immediately. The HOA board is dissolved. A loud gasp echoed through the entire courtroom. The HOA president covered her face with both hands, crying uncontrollably. The board members looked destroyed, and the quiet man, simply closed his eyes for a moment. Not in celebration, not in revenge, but in relief. Deep, overwhelming relief. For the first time in years, he felt free. For the first time in years, he felt safe. And for the first time in years, justice didn't feel like a dream. Felt real. But little did he know, the story was far from over. Because when he walked out of that courtroom, the entire neighborhood would be waiting for the man who now owned the land beneath their homes. The gavel's echo had not even faded when the entire courtroom seemed to breathe out at once, like everyone had been holding their breath for hours. The HOA board members sat frozen, their eyes empty, their faces pale, as if the entire foundation of their lives had collapsed beneath them. Their power, their pride, their authority, gone in a single moment. But the quiet man didn't look at them with anger or triumph. He looked down at his old brown folder, his fingers brushing the worn edges gently, almost lovingly, because that folder had carried everything. His fear, his hope, his proof, his family history. For a moment he just stood there, breathing slowly, letting the truth settle in his bones. The judge was still speaking, but his voice felt far away, drowned under the sound of the man's own heartbeat. "This ruling will be forwarded to the county," the judge said firmly. "The homeowners will be notified officially. Until a new community leadership is elected, the neighborhood will remain under temporary county oversight." A sense of calm washed through the room. But under that calm, there was still fear of what would happen next, fear of change, fear of the unknown. The homeowners sitting behind him watched him silently, their eyes filled with something different now. Not suspicion, not judgment, not curiosity, but respect. The sheriff stepped toward him slowly, his boots clicking softly on the floor. "You okay?" he whispered. The man gave a small nod, but his eyes showed exhaustion so deep it looked like it lived in his soul. He wasn't used to winning. He wasn't used to speaking for others. He wasn't used to being the strong one in the room. But today had forced him to become everything he never expected to be. When the judge dismissed the room, people rose from their seats slowly, as if afraid of breaking the moment. The homeowners whispered as they walked out. "I can't believe it. He saved us. He saved the whole neighborhood. The HOA is gone." Just like that. But the HOA board, they didn't move at all. They sat in silence, the weight of consequences finally crashing down on them. The HOA president wiped her tears with shaking hands, her voice small and broken. "What have we done?" she whispered to no one. "How could we not see this coming?" One of the board members leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "We pushed him too far," he muttered. "We pushed everyone too far." Another woman whispered, "I never thought he'd fight back. We thought he was weak." The man heard every word, but he didn't turn. He didn't want to see them break anymore. His heart felt heavy, tired, full of emotions he couldn't name. As he walked toward the courthouse doors, he moved slowly, like someone carrying invisible weight on his back. His legs felt weak, his chest felt tight, and his mind kept replaying every moment the HOA had stood on his porch, threatening to take everything from him. And now he had taken everything from them, not because he wanted to, but because the truth demanded it. When he reached the hallway, the cold morning air hit him again, reminding him where the day had started. He stood still, letting the cold wash over him, calming him, grounding him. Then he heard footsteps behind him. He turned and saw a group of homeowners standing there, their eyes soft, emotional, even grateful. A man in his 50s stepped forward first. He cleared his throat, trying not to sound too emotional. "We owe you," he said quietly. "We owe you more than we can say." The quiet man shook his head. "You don't owe me anything." "No," the man said gently. "We do." A woman walked forward next. Someone he'd seen many times. Someone who used to close her curtains whenever the HOA was outside arguing with him. Today her voice trembled. "They fined us too, threatened us too. But we never fought back the way you did." She swallowed hard. "You didn't just save your home. You saved all of ours too." Others nodded, standing behind her. Some had tears in their eyes. Some looked ashamed for not helping him earlier. And then an older woman, someone he remembered from childhood, the one who used to give him cookies when he rode his bike past her yard, stepped close and placed her hand on his arm. Her hand was warm, soft, trembling slightly. "Your grandfather would be proud," she whispered. Those words hit him harder than anything that day. His throat tightened, his vision blurred for a moment. He nodded gently, unable to speak. The woman smiled through tears and said, "You protected his land. You protected his legacy." He inhaled sharply, trying to steady himself. I just wanted to keep my home," he whispered softly. "I didn't want all this." The crowd looked at him with empathy, understanding the weight he carried. "Maybe you didn't want it," the older woman said, "but you were the only one strong enough to handle it." He lowered his eyes. He didn't feel strong. He felt tired. But he also felt something else. Something warm, something deep, something healing. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. Outside the courthouse doors, a group of reporters had gathered, shouting questions, cameras flashing, microphones rising in the air. "Sir, did you know you owned the land before today? How does it feel to take down the entire HOA? Are you evicting the board members? What happens now?" But he didn't answer. He wasn't here for headlines. He wasn't here for fame. He stepped down the courthouse steps quietly, ignoring the noise around him. But behind him, something unexpected happened. Homeowners followed. Not because they were chasing him, but because they stood with him. A few reached out and touched his shoulder gently. A few wiped their eyes. A few whispered "thank you," as softly as a prayer. And for the first time in his life, he realized something powerful. The neighborhood he thought hated him actually admired him. As he reached the bottom of the steps, the sheriff caught up to him again. "You know," he said with a small smile, "you walked in there alone." The man nodded. "Yeah, but you didn't walk out alone." The man looked behind him. The homeowners were still there, quiet, supportive, grateful. And he felt something warm spread through his chest. Maybe this wasn't the end of something. Maybe this was the beginning. He took a long breath. The storm had passed. The truth had won. Justice had been served. But the journey wasn't over. Because now the entire neighborhood looked to him. Not with fear, not with anger, but with trust, with hope. And as he stepped onto the sidewalk, one question echoed in everyone's heart. When the quiet man finally left the courthouse behind and the noise of reporters faded, he walked slowly toward the parking lot, his steps heavy, his mind still spinning with everything that had happened. The cold air bit at his skin, but he barely felt it. His heart was too full, too overwhelmed, too tangled in emotions he couldn't name. The homeowners stayed behind, watching him walk away, whispering among themselves about what the future now held. Some wanted to thank him again. Some wanted to ask him what he planned to do next. Some wanted to apologize for not standing with him sooner. But no one approached him, because they could see he needed a moment alone. He reached his old pickup truck, the same truck the HOA mocked for being too old, too rusty, not community standard. He rested his hand on the door and closed his eyes. Memories rushed through him. Every letter the HOA taped to his door, every meeting they forced him to attend, every threat that made him lose sleep. He remembered the night he sat in this very truck, gripping the steering wheel with shaking hands, wondering if he should just sell everything and leave. He remembered feeling small, powerless, broken. And now, suddenly, he was the one holding the power. Not because he wanted it, not because he asked for it, but because the truth had placed it in his hands. He opened the truck door and sat inside, resting his head against the steering wheel. A long breath left his chest, a breath that carried months, maybe years of pain. His eyes burned, not from anger, but from the emotional weight pressing on him. He whispered to himself, "Grandpa, I hope I did right." The old man was gone, but his presence felt close. His memories lived in the land, in the house, in the documents the quiet man clutched so tightly. Suddenly, he heard soft footsteps approaching. He lifted his head slowly. The HOA president stood a few feet away, her pink blazer wrinkled, her eyes swollen from crying, her pride gone completely. She looked different now. Not powerful, not confident, not cruel, just human, broken, scared, guilty. She swallowed hard before speaking. Her voice was small, trembling. "Can I talk to you?" He didn't answer at first. Part of him wanted to say no. Part of him remembered every harsh word she had thrown at him. But he nodded slowly. She stepped closer, but not too close, as if afraid to invade his space. She wrung her hands together anxiously. "You didn't have to spare us," she whispered. "You could have taken everything. You still can." He looked at her carefully. "I don't want your homes." She closed her eyes, tears spilling. "I know," she whispered. "That's what makes this hurt even more." He raised an eyebrow, confused. She let out a shaky breath. "We justified everything we did by telling ourselves we were protecting the neighborhood, following rules, keeping standards. But really," she paused, her voice breaking, "really we were controlling people, punishing them, punishing you." Her chin quivered. "You were right. We didn't care who we hurt." He remained silent. She looked down at her shoes. "I judged you because I thought you were less than me." Her voice shook harder. "I thought power made me better." Then she looked up, tears wet on her cheeks. "But you had every reason to destroy me today, and you didn't." He swallowed the lump in his throat. He didn't feel good about her suffering. It didn't heal the wounds inside him. It didn't erase the fear he lived with for so long. But hearing her say the truth, finally, felt like something inside him loosened a little. She stepped back, wiping her face. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "I don't deserve it." She looked at him with eyes full of regret. "I'm just sorry." For the first time since he'd met her, she sounded real, honest, human, and the weight in his chest softened, not healed but eased. "I hope," she said softly, "whatever you decide next, it brings peace for everyone." She walked away slowly, her steps unsteady, leaving him alone again. He watched her go, the woman who had spent years trying to break him, now broken herself. Not by revenge, but by truth. He started the truck and drove toward home. The closer he got to the neighborhood, the heavier his heart felt again. He didn't know what waited for him. Anger? Fear? Questions? Expectations? When he turned onto his street, he slowed down. Cars lined the road. People stood in yards and on sidewalks. Neighbors who never spoke to him before, who once avoided him because they feared the HOA, were all gathered outside. He felt panic for a moment, gripping the wheel tighter. But when they saw his truck, something happened he didn't expect. People didn't shout. They didn't crowd him. They didn't overwhelm him. They applauded. Actual applause. Soft, emotional, grateful applause. Some people wiped tears. Some smiled nervously. Some stood with hands on their hearts. A little girl held up a sign she drew with crayons. "Thank you for saving our homes." The man's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to being seen at all, especially not as a hero. He parked the truck slowly and stepped out. The air felt warm despite the cold. A father with 2 kids approached him first. "Sir," he said quietly, "we were too scared to stand up to them. We all were. But you did what none of us could." The man shook his head. "I didn't plan any of this." "Maybe not," the father said gently. "But you were brave enough to keep going." A young woman stepped forward next. "They ruined my garden. Fined me hundreds of dollars." She wiped her eyes. "But today, you gave me hope again." The crowd grew closer around him. Soft voices, thankful words, emotional nods. Parents, elderly couples, young families, people he had lived near for years but never truly knew. People who had suffered quietly under the same rules, the same fear, the same pressure. And now they looked at him with gratitude so deep it shook him. One voice rose above the others. A teenage boy who stepped forward nervously. "Sir," he mumbled. "My dad said you saved the whole neighborhood." He smiled shyly. "I think you're a hero." The man felt his heart twist painfully. A hero. Him. The man who almost gave up. He blinked hard, trying to push the emotions down, but they rose anyway. He took a shaky breath and finally spoke. "I'm not a hero," he said quietly. "I'm just someone who was tired of being pushed." The crowd nodded, understanding. "But," he continued, looking around, "none of us ever deserved how they treated us." A murmur of agreement spread. He swallowed hard. "From today, things will change." The crowd leaned closer. "You won't be bullied anymore," he said. "You won't be threatened. You won't live in fear." A woman whispered through tears, "Thank God." "But," the man added, "we decide the future together." The crowd stood still, listening. "This is our neighborhood," he said, placing a hand on his chest. "Our homes, our families, our lives." He looked around at every face. "We will build something better than an HOA." The crowd nodded, some crying, some smiling, some sighing in relief. And then he said the sentence that made every heart in the neighborhood melt. "I promise, no family here will ever face what I faced." Soft applause rose again, gentle, emotional, grateful. He had walked into the courthouse alone. But he stood here now surrounded by people who finally saw him. Not as a troublemaker, not as a problem, but as someone who stood up for them when no one else could. And as the sun dipped low over the houses he technically owned the land under, he realized something powerful. He wasn't just saving his home. That night, long after the applause faded and the neighbors returned to their homes with lighter hearts, the quiet man stood alone on his front porch, staring at the neighborhood he had just saved. The cool breeze brushed past him, carrying the soft sound of wind chimes from a nearby house. The streetlights glowed faintly, their warm circles of light spreading across the pavement like gentle reminders that darkness never lasts forever. And yet, despite the peace settling over the neighborhood, his mind was far from calm. He leaned on the porch railing and looked out over the quiet street. The weight of the day still pressed against his chest, heavy and real, like a shadow that refused to leave. The truth was simple. Today had changed everything. Not only for him, but for everyone who lived here. And tomorrow would change even more. He heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel. When he turned, he saw the older woman from earlier, the one who used to give him cookies when he was a child, standing at the bottom of his porch steps. Her warm eyes glistened in the dim light. "May I come up?" she asked gently. He nodded. She climbed the steps slowly and stood beside him, her hands clasped together. "This neighborhood needed today," she whispered. "We needed someone to stand up. Someone strong." He shook his head, his voice low. "I wasn't strong. I was scared every day." She smiled softly. "Being strong doesn't mean you're never scared. It means you keep going even when you are." He didn't speak. He just breathed, letting her words settle inside him. She reached out and touched his arm lightly. "Your grandfather," she said, her voice warm and certain, "would be so proud of what you did today." His eyes burned suddenly, emotion rising so fast he almost looked away. The woman gave him a knowing smile, then slowly walked back down the porch, leaving him alone with the night. A few minutes later, he went inside. But sleep didn't come. He tossed and turned, replaying every moment. The judge's words, the HOA's collapse, the homeowner's gratitude. And underneath all of it, he felt something deeper, a responsibility he couldn't ignore. When morning came, the sun rose bright and warm, turning the streets golden. But before the man could even drink his morning coffee, there was a knock at his door. He opened it to find dozens of neighbors gathered outside. Not angry, not demanding, but hopeful. A young woman stepped forward. "We didn't know what else to do," she said softly. "We don't have leadership now, and we don't know how to run things." A father with his son added, "The HOA is gone. We need something new, something fair." A teenager chimed in, "We trust you." The crowd nodded, their faces full of trust so deep it made his heart ache. He held up his hands gently. "I'm not a leader," he said. "I'm just someone who wanted peace." But an older man stepped forward, shaking his head. "That's exactly why you should lead." The quiet man froze. "Lead?" That word felt heavy, heavier than any document he had found. He looked at the people in front of him. Families, elders, young couples, children. They weren't looking at him the way the HOA used to, not with judgment or superiority. They were looking at him with hope. Real hope. "We don't want another HOA," a woman said firmly. "We just want someone we trust to guide us until we figure things out." Someone else added, "And there's no one we trust more than you." He swallowed hard, the emotion almost overwhelming. He glanced toward his house. The memories, the pain, the history, and he realized something he hadn't understood until this moment. He had fought so hard to protect his home that he didn't notice he had protected everyone else's too. He finally nodded slowly. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll help." Relief washed over the crowd like a warm wave. Some clapped softly. Some smiled. Some even cried. And that was the beginning of something new. Over the next several days, he held small meetings on his lawn. People brought chairs, tables, lemonade, and notebooks. There were no threats, no fines, no rules designed to punish. Only neighbors talking, planning, deciding together what their community should be. They voted on simple guidelines, nothing crazy, nothing controlling. Just fairness, respect, shared responsibility. Every voice mattered. Every opinion counted. And slowly, the neighborhood transformed. Houses looked brighter. People smiled more. Families talked to each other instead of hiding behind curtains. The fear that once lived in the air was gone. Completely gone. One evening, as he wrapped up another meeting, the HOA president approached him quietly. She hadn't shown her face since the courthouse. She looked unsure, almost afraid. "Can I talk to you?" she asked softly. He took a slow breath and nodded. She stepped closer, clutching a small box in her hands. I found this," she said. "It was in the HOA office. I thought you should have it." She handed him the box and stepped back. He opened it slowly. Inside was a framed picture of his grandfather standing next to the developer, the two men smiling proudly in front of the land that would one day become the neighborhood. His heart tightened. The HOA president swallowed hard. "I took it from the wall years ago," she said, her voice breaking. "I didn't want the board to know your family had history here. I didn't want you to have leverage." Tears slid down her cheeks. "I'm so sorry." She didn't wait for forgiveness. She turned and walked away before he could say anything. He held the picture close, the weight of history pressing into his palms. That night, he hung the photo in his living room, right above the mantel, a reminder of where everything started and why he had fought so hard. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into quiet, peaceful months. The community he helped rebuild grew stronger, kinder, closer. Neighbors helped each other. Children played freely. People smiled when they passed his house. Life finally returned to something beautiful. And one warm evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in soft shades of orange, he stood on his porch again, looking out over the neighborhood. Not the neighborhood he saved. Not the neighborhood he controlled. But the neighborhood he helped heal. A small boy rode past on his bike and waved. "Hi, mister." The man smiled softly. "Hey, buddy." A couple walked their dog and called out, "Thank you again for everything." He waved back, and as the peaceful sounds of the neighborhood filled the air, he felt something inside him finally settle. Peace. Real peace. And then he whispered something softly to the sky, something only the wind could hear. "Grandpa, I kept the land safe." He breathed out slowly, feeling lighter than he had in years. He had walked into court alone. He had walked out owning the land beneath every house. But the truth was deeper than that. He walked out owning something far more powerful. The respect, trust, and gratitude of an entire community. And that was something no HOA could ever take away. That was the moment the story closed. Not with revenge, not with anger, but with healing. Because sometimes the quietest people carry the strongest hearts. And this man, the one they all laughed at, became the very person who rebuilt their world.